It was a light that didn't belong, not the gentle glow of dawn, and definitely not the familiar flicker of candlelight. It was something else, a strange, pulsing light that pulled me from my sleep and drew me to the window. What I saw next would forever change how I looked at the night sky. The air in the room was cold, that deep-down chill of a November night. Outside, the world was supposed to be wrapped in a kind of profound darkness that comes just before dawn. The only sounds should have been the distant bark of a dog or the settling groans of the house. I remember the weight of the quilt, the faint scent of wood smoke from the fireplace, all the familiar comforts of a world that ran on predictable rhythms. The sun rose, the sun set, the moon waxed and waned. The stars were just fixed points of cold, distant light, a map that never changed. But this light was different. It seemed to have a life of its own, casting dancing shadows across the floor. It was a pale, insistent glow that just kept growing. My first thought was fire. A neighbor's barn, maybe. A terrible, but at least understandable, explanation. But there was no smell of smoke, no crackle of flames, only this silent, overwhelming light. A knot of unease tightened in my gut. I threw the quilt off, my feet hitting the cold wooden floor, and crept towards the window. Pulling back the heavy curtain, I saw it. The world outside wasn't on fire. The heavens were. The sky is falling. For a second my mind just refused to process what I was seeing. The sky, the vast, familiar, black sky, was alive. It was as if someone had taken a giant celestial hammer, shattered the dome of heaven into a million glittering pieces, and now they were all falling down on us. Stars, or what looked like stars, were streaking through the darkness in every direction, more than I could ever count, more than I ever dreamed could exist. These weren't just faint, fleeting specks, either. They were bold, brilliant slashes of light that appeared from nowhere and vanished just as fast. Some were like fine, silver threads, others were great, fiery bolts that exploded in flashes of impossible color. They fell in torrents, a relentless cascade of light that filled every single inch of the sky. An account ID here later described it perfectly. The meteors came down, almost as thick as snowflakes in a winter storm. But this wasn't a blizzard of snow. It was a blizzard of fire. My breath caught in my throat. I just stood there frozen, my hand still clutching the curtain, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. It had to be a dream, some feverish hallucination. But then I heard a sound that proved this was no dream. It was my own heart, pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. And then another sound, shouting. Faint at first, but then growing louder, a chorus of voices rising from the houses all around. I wasn't the only one seeing this. We were all witnessing the impossible, together. A world awakened. I had to see more. I stumbled out of my room, my bare feet padding silently through the quiet house. After fumbling with the bolt on the front door, I stepped onto the porch, and the frigid November air hit me like a physical blow. But the cold was nothing compared to the sight that now filled my entire field of vision. The whole world was bathed in this eerie, brilliant light. The ground, the trees, the faces of my neighbors now spilling out of their homes, all of it was illuminated not by a lamp or the moon, but by the celestial chaos unfolding above. The light was so bright it was said you could read a newspaper by it. It felt ancient, almost biblical, and the sounds, it was a symphony of human emotion at its most raw. To my left, a family was on their knees in the dirt road, hands clasped in prayer, their voices rising in a desperate hymn. To my right, a man was just yelling, pointing at the sky, his words a jumble of fear and disbelief. Children were crying, clinging to their mothers' skirts. Some people were just standing there like me, heads tilted back, mouths hanging open in silent, stunned awe. For many, this wasn't a marvel of nature. It was a sign. This was the end of days, the final judgment promised in scripture, and you could feel the fear in the air. People were shouting that the day of judgment had arrived. This was terror born from a deep and abiding faith, a belief that the heavens themselves were God's final messenger. For hours, from about 2 in the morning until the sun rose, the sky stayed perfectly clear, offering no clouds to hide the terrifying, magnificent show. From fear to wonder. I could feel their fear. It seeped right into my bones, a primal terror that the world as I knew it was ending. Every fiery streak that burned across the sky felt like a messenger of doom. I watched as some meteors flared so brightly they left smoky, phantom trails hanging in the air, ghosts of their brief, brilliant lives. How could we survive this? But as the minutes stretched into an hour, and then another, something inside me began to shift. The fear, while still there, started to fade. It was replaced by something else. a profound, overwhelming sense of wonder. The sheer scale of it all was beyond anything you could imagine. This wasn't an attack. It wasn't an ending. It was a performance, a celestial ballet of such impossible beauty that it defied all earthly words. I started to see the patterns, the way the meteors all seemed to radiate from a single point in the constellation Leo, like spokes on a great, cosmic wheel. I saw the colors flashes of emerald green, streaks of burning gold, and sudden bursts of white light so pure it almost hurt to look. This wasn't destruction. It was artistry on a cosmic scale. I felt myself shrink, becoming an insignificant speck in the face of such power. And yet, somehow, I also felt an immense sense of privilege. To be alive, to be standing on this small patch of earth, and to witness this. It was a gift. One man, Parley P. Pratt, later wrote that he found the sight sublime and joyful, a hopeful sign from above. In that moment, under that sky of falling stars, I understood why it's hard to imagine what it must have felt like to see the sky filled with something so beautiful and terrifying, all at once. If you've ever been truly mesmerized by the night sky, whether it was a simple meteor shower or a stunning view of the Milky Way, I'd love to hear about your experience in the comments below, and if you're enjoying this journey back in time, please subscribe for more stories that bring history to life. A search for meaning. As the hours wore on and the world didn't end, the raw emotion gave way to questions. What was this? What was happening? We'd all seen shooting stars before. Of course, a few lone wanderers on a summer night, seen as good luck or a fleeting omen, but this was a deluge. It was an event on a planetary scale, visible, as we'd later learn, all the way from Canada down to Mexico. The common wisdom back then was that these things were atmospheric, like lightning or strange clouds, but this display was too vast, too organized, to be a simple storm in our own air. The sky itself was perfectly clear. The stars that weren't falling remained in their familiar places, cold and steady. It felt like we were sailing through a cosmic river of light. What we couldn't have known that night was that we were witnessing the birth of a new science. A professor at Yale University named Denison Olmsted was so captivated by the event that he put advertisements in newspapers, asking for eyewitness accounts from across the country. He basically invented what we'd now call citizen science. People like me, my neighbors, thousands of ordinary people who had stood under that impossible sky sent in their observations. And from that mountain of data, Olmsted proved something revolutionary. Meteors weren't weather. They were objects from outer space, burning up as they hit our atmosphere. He correctly figured out that the meteors seemed to come from a point in the constellation Leo, and that this shower was a recurring event. It would take several more decades for other astronomers to connect the Leonids to their source, a trail of debris left by a comet. We now know as to that night we weren't just watching the sky fall. We were providing the clues that would help humanity understand its real place in the cosmos, a night of shared history. This event was a great unifier for those few hours. It didn't matter who you were or what you believed. Across the continent, people were united in a shared experience of awe and terror. We'd later hear stories of how it was seen by countless souls. It was witnessed by enslaved people and their masters, by city dwellers and frontier families, and by Native American tribes who used it to mark their calendars. Future leaders and thinkers were among the witnesses. A young Frederick Douglass saw the shower, later calling it a gorgeous spectacle. Joseph Smith, the founder of the Latter-day Saint movement, viewed it as a powerful sign and a fulfillment of prophecy. And there's a story, a quieter one, that's often told about a young man in Illinois, Abraham Lincoln. The legend goes that he was awakened by a frantic neighbor who was convinced the world was ending. Lincoln went out to see the spectacle for himself. Years later, during the darkest days of the Civil War, he supposedly recalled that night. He used it as a metaphor, noting how even as thousands of stars fell and seemed to vanish, the great fixed constellations remained unwavering. For him, the memory was one of constancy and hope, a reminder that even when it feels like everything is falling apart, some things endure. That night became a benchmark in time, a moment people would refer to for the rest of their lives as the night the stars fell, the coming of the dawn. Then, just as surely as it had begun, the spectacle started to fade. In the east, a faint familiar line of gray appeared on the horizon. It was the dawn, arriving right on schedule, its simple, earthly light beginning a slow battle with the extraordinary celestial one. The torrent of falling stars thinned to a gentle flurry. One by one, the streaks of light grew fainter, their brilliance swallowed by the growing glow of the morning sun. The sky, which had been a canvas of frantic, beautiful chaos, slowly returned to its placid blue. The last few meteors were like dying embers, tiny sparks that flashed for a moment and were gone. Then, there were no more. A profound silence fell over us. The prayers had stopped. The shouting had ceased. We just stood there, a small crowd of neighbors shivering in the cold morning air, looking at each other. Our faces, once lit by unearthly lights, were now painted in the ordinary colors of sunrise. It was over. The world hadn't ended. We had survived. We turned and walked back to our homes, back to our ordinary lives. But something inside us was fundamentally changed. The sky would never look the same. The night was no longer just a predictable darkness. It was a place of infinite possibility, terrifying beauty, and secrets still waiting to be discovered. That morning I stepped back inside my house, and the world was exactly as I had left it. The fire needed tending, and the day's chores were waiting. And yet, everything felt different. The solid floor beneath my feet, the sturdy walls around MIT, all felt a bit more temporary. We were living our lives on a tiny, fragile stage, adrift in a cosmos more active and more wondrous than we had ever let ourselves imagine. The great Leonid Meteor storm of 1833 was more than just a light show. It was a cultural and scientific turning point. It terrified a nation and, in doing so, forced it to look up and ask questions. It shattered old ideas and opened the door to truly understanding our solar system. It gave millions of people a shared memory, a story that would be passed down for generations. But for me, and for the thousands like me who stood beneath that sky, it was simpler and more profound. It was a moment of connection to the infinite. The stars didn't really fall that night. Instead, they opened our eyes, showing us just how vast and magnificent the universe truly is. Thank you for stepping back in time with me to witness this incredible event. History is full of these powerful, human moments that changed how we see the world. If you found this story as amazing as I do, please give it a like, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, so you don't miss our next journey into the past. What historical event should we witness next? Let me know your ideas in the comments.